The constitutions of India and Bangladesh share several similarities in terms of their text and import. Fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy, judicial review, and the writ jurisdiction of the constitutional courts of the countries are a few among the many common strands. Unsurprisingly, the judicial pronouncements frequently employ analogous principles in enforcing these provisions. As I said yesterday, the rarest of rare doctrine in death penalty cases, the public interest litigation doctrine, the basic structure doctrine, are a few of the Indian Supreme Court exports that have resonated with our counterparts here in Bangladesh. I will address these in a while. The constitutions of India and Bangladesh, and I dare say also Nepal and Sri Lanka, share another significant similarity. They are all given to themselves by the people of the country. The constitutional authority, as recognized in no small measure by the preamble, is derived from the people of the country. By placing the people at the forefront of our constitutional development, we recognize the cardinal principle that institutions of governance and the people administering these institutions are accountable to the people. It cannot be gainsaid that the people of the country are not a uniform monolith. They are a rather complex conglomeration of diverse, differently placed individuals. The success of constitutions and constitutional courts lies in recognizing the differences in a pluralistic society and addressing them. South Asian countries, though uniquely positioned in their respective post-colonial constitutional journeys, share various legal and contextual similarities. A lot of our disputes in areas of gender, representation, access to justice delivery mechanisms, and the rights of the disabled stem from common cultural premises. The legal solutions, therefore, must also be found in similarities. For instance, both Nepal and India have struggled to find solutions against practices such as dowry, which would be unheard of in this exact form elsewhere in the world. In India as well as Bangladesh, we have struggled to find solutions to remedy gender stereotypes and the diminished public participation of women and other marginalized groups. The Constitution of Bangladesh establishes the equality principle in Article 27. Article 28(4) recognizes equality between men and women in all spheres of the state and public life. In Bangladesh, Legal Aid and Services Trust, BLAST versus Bangladesh, the two-finger test in examining the victims of rape was held to be unconstitutional. The Indian Supreme Court in Lilu versus Haryana had similarly found that this test was intrusive, unscientific, and undermined the dignity of the victims of rape. I use these instances to demonstrate how two distinct national systems have, in their democratic history, encountered similar hurdles and attempted to surmount them. In addressing these issues, the courts, as bulwarks of constitutional rights, have arrived at similar constitutional solutions to these problems. The Indian Supreme Court, through PIL or public interest litigation, has liberalized access to courts by diluting the standards of locus standi, who can approach the courts. It has appropriately been named social action litigation in Bangladesh, and has been successfully employed to champion public causes such as non-discrimination and environmental preservation. Constitutional developments arrive in one country and around the same time as they do in another. Judges addressing similar problems cannot close their eyes to the opinions of judges who have grappled with them, even if to distinguish their problem from others. A comparative constitutional response is thus the way forward for our similar systems. This is the very thrust of dialogic comparative constitutionalism. Our laws would be better tested, regardless of the outcomes, if they are tested against the wider touchstone of jurisprudence stemming from our neighborhood. The object is not mere legal imitation, but to achieve critical, dialogue-led self-reflection. The recognition of the public place as a specific site of discrimination, overt and subtle, is significant in our cultural context, both in Bangladesh and India. It is comparatively easier to spot overt instances of discrimination and exclusionary norms. Our constitutions, though contextualized, retain features of public institutions that were associated with pre-democracy colonial legacy. The challenge, therefore, before us is to shed antiquated notions of our public institutions, such as our courts. We must, in our policies, as much as in our laws, demonstrate our commitment to inclusion and diversity. Everything from the language of the law to its processes to its infrastructure must reflect this commitment. For instance, unlike in the US and UK, where legislation prohibited women's entry into the bar, India, to the contrary, expressly proscribed and prohibited sex-based disqualification from practice. Cornelia Sorabji, the first woman to practice law in India, and many more like her, still battle gendered perceptions in entering the profession almost entirely dominated by men. Similarly, Bangladesh is also leading from the front, indicating that societies in the global south can be the forerunners of societal change, particularly gender justice. I want to spend just a few moments at this point, forgive me for doing that, and I want to speak about the legal profession. The legal profession traditionally has been male dominated. It has been patriarchal. The spread of legal education has changed the male dominated nature of legal education and profession. More and more parents, more and more young girls are entering the legal profession in India, in Bangladesh, and in our neighborhood. It has created new avenues for women. Transactional lawyering, for instance, where women don't come to court but do their work in structuring transactions, both domestic and international, have given the place for women because that is where meritocracy is succeeding. What we have learned in India is that when you create a level playing field for women, women succeed like no other person in our society. For example, in the new recruitment to the district judiciary in India at the lowest levels, namely the civil judge junior divisions, over 50% of the new recruits are women coming in on their own merit. Between 1950 and 2024, all of 11 women lawyers were designated as senior counsel by the Supreme Court of India. In the month of February, in one go, we designated 12 women lawyers as senior counsel. I think this is a sign of the changing times. Bangladesh and India are both countries with a demographic dividend. Our countries are really young. Our populations are young. And I think as lawyers and judges, there's a great deal of expectation from our institutions, such as the courts, to answer the call of the demographic dividend, which we have to do for our societies to advance and prosper. Now, societies are already doing that, and it's our duty as judges and lawyers to take that forward. The adversarial litigation in India and in Bangladesh is a colonial import. One person wins and another person loses in the court. But then there are alternate forms of dispute resolution which have emerged, such as mediation, which were the traditional forms of dispute resolution in our societies. So it's important that we build on what we have, namely our courts, but we also encourage our societies to resolve differences peacefully. We get a lot of matrimonial disputes in our courts today. Matrimonial disputes because our societies are changing. Men and women have become mobile. The wife may be based in Bangalore, the husband may be based in Silicon Valley, in California. Distance separates and causes problems for a variety of reasons. Mediation, which is voluntary, consensual, and recognizes party autonomy, has been a game changer in resolving disputes peacefully. Our role as judges is also undergoing a change. Are we to look upon our role merely as people who decide disputes between A and B? That's the core of our function. But as judges, we also perform the role of being facilitators for social change in our society. Our courts owe their existence to a colonial legacy, but judges in colonial times performed completely different functions. Today, we are in tandem with society. We have to ensure that we look at the needs of our society, encourage social growth and social progress by allowing for our marginalized groups to come into the mainstream, encourage greater participation of all segments of our society, including the most dominant half, which is represented by Her Excellency, the Prime Minister. Finally, we must use greater technology, both in India and Bangladesh, as a means of outreach to our citizens. I'm always asked, with the technology divide, with the internet divide, even in countries like India, is technology only for the elite? And my answer is completely to the contrary. As part of the e-phase, the third phase of the e-courts project in India, the government of India made available 7,000 crores a few months ago for the Indian judiciary. We are using this money to bridge the internet divide. We have set up the National Judicial Data Grid, which maps every case across India into a judicial data grid. We have put forth the digital SCR, or the Supreme Court resources, the Supreme Court reports, which is available free of charge, not only to Indian citizens, but to people across the world, that we publicize our own judgments. We are setting up e-Seva Kendras in every court and establishment in India, so that all our citizens who do not have a smartphone or an Android phone can gain access to all the facilities which we, as judges and courts, have provided. In conclusion, then, may I say that a conversation about constitutional developments in South Asia is incomplete without access to constitutional courts. We must recognize that seemingly basic facilities, such as washrooms, ramps, and appropriate seating in court complexes, can be important enablers of access to courts. There are other barriers to access. As lawyers and judges, we are given to believe that our laws and judgments are accessible merely because they are publicly available. We must make sure that we as judges and courts learn to communicate to our citizens. We have to reach out to our citizens. We cannot expect our citizens to reach out to us. That represents the changing face of our societies. As we aggregate our similarities and identify divergences, we must strike a delicate balance. We must neither gloss over details nor fixate on them. We must use our similarities to examine how distinct national systems have in their democratic history encountered similar hurdles. In addressing many issues, the courts have found similar constitutional solutions. Notwithstanding the many similarities, our constitutions retain our unique national identities, and we respect our national identities. The idea of celebrating South Asian constitutional developments is not to celebrate unreasoned conformity with the ideals adopted by a particular jurisdiction at the cost of our unique identities. While we engage with each other's constitutional experiences, we must be wary of confirming certain outcomes simply because they align with our premeditated beliefs. The purpose of this engagement over the last 2 days is not to reaffirm and adopt comfortable conclusions from our neighbors. Such an exercise would only produce a body of self-affirming and uncritical legal norms. There may be initial discomfort with engaging with foreign judicial systems. Similarities that we are trying to trace may seem like forcible imperial attempts to gloss over cultural differences. However, to my mind, the purpose of this conference and the constitution-centric engagement is entirely different. It is not to obtain homogeneity of outcomes, but to have a meaningful, even critical conversation about what we can do better, mistakes we can avoid, and lessons we can learn. We can ill afford the comfort of relying solely on inward-looking national experiences. Conferences such as this demonstrate our shared commitment to creating what I believe are learning legal systems which are always at work, always in the service of our people. I am confident that conversations such as this will help us appreciate each other's legal systems better and learn from them. I thank you very deeply from the bottom of my heart for inviting me. Jai Bangla, Jai Hind.